My name is Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. So what are these? The LSAT blog is a free website I started over 10 years ago to share my LSAT knowledge. Contains advice on and strategies for every section of the LSAT, logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension, test day prep, law school admissions, and much, much more than that as well. It has over 1,000 articles, and it's kind of the culmination of all my LSAT knowledge up until about a year ago when I realized that nobody likes to read anymore. Like, we like to watch videos, we like to listen to podcasts, and so I changed where I put my information. It's now on the YouTube channel LSAT Unplugged and the podcast as well. And this class, by the way, I'm recording it. It will also be on the YouTube channel and on the podcast down the line. What that means is that if you're here to just have me lecture at you, there's no point to being here, because you can watch the recording later and you can watch it at double speed and save some time. The point of being here in this room right now is that you have the chance to interact with me, to get your questions answered, and to make this personal to your individual situation. That's what I want you to take away from this class. I've given you a handout with, on one side, just an easy LSAT cheat sheet summarizing the exam, giving you a general overview. I don't need to lecture that at you. You can find that on the blog. You can find it anywhere else pretty much. The other side, there's a logic game that we'll get to at some point today. And I want you to take this material and make it your own. Because I can teach, but that's what the YouTube is for. Your job here is to learn. And if you walk out of here not understanding this logic game or anything else we cover, honestly, that's on you, because you have the chance to ask me your questions, to articulate things in your own words, and make sure that you understand it. There's two ways to show you understand the material. One of them is simply talking, articulating it, and double checking whether it's correct. The second thing is you to articulate it and teach it to somebody else. Explain why it's right in your own words, because you never know if the way you phrase it might connect with the way somebody else thinks and makes it a lot clearer for them. So we'll get into that logic game in a little bit, but first I do want to cover some other things because we have a lot on the agenda for today. LSAT 101, that's pretty much what the easy LSAT cheat sheet is about. You go on my website, you'll be able to download a PDF with all the links to everything I've covered there. But starting your prep. Has anybody actually started studying for the LSAT yet? All right, good, a number of you. How are you studying? What are you doing?
Well, I haven't studied in a while, but I purchased a course and I wound up watching all the videos that they have, and they have different questions and stuff, so that's what I was doing.
And when are you taking the LSAT?
I plan on taking it in September.
Oh, good, so you got some time. Other folks, when are you taking the LSAT? July. Anyone taking June in just a couple days? Well, that's good, because you probably should just relax at that point. There's not too much you can cram in now. But July, September, anyone else taking July or September or beyond? September. Good, so you've got some time. You can really make an impact on your prep. So what I want to do then, since most of you have quite a bit of time, is just walk through how I recommend structuring your studying, whether you're taking in July, which is about 6-7 weeks away, and then September, which gives you really just about 4 months. So you've got a good chunk of time. I recommend breaking your studying into 5 different phases. So LASER is learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. These are the phases. You want to go through them in this order. Learning is just basically reviewing textbooks and learning the basics, doing drills, learning the foundational aspects of the exam, what the different sections are, games, reasoning, reading comp, the different question types within these sections. Accuracy is doing questions untimed, perhaps by type, and just giving yourself a chance to learn the material and apply what you've learned from the textbooks to the actual questions. You're not worrying about timing at all, because timing is a huge extra constraint on this exam. Instead, you're just focusing on getting things right. Then later, you can move on to learning it and getting it right under timed conditions. That's what sections are for. Individual timed sections of 35 minutes, unless, of course, you have accommodations. Some people will get time and a half. Some will get double time, but most people are getting 35 minutes and learning how to do 23, 24, 25, 26, 27 questions within that constraint is a whole nother aspect of prep. Then you have your exams, which are full-length timed exams, 5 sections, not 4. The published books of LSAT prep tests only contain 4 sections because, of course, they're not giving you the experimental section. The experimental is going to be used later on a future test administration, but on your test, whether you have accommodations or not, you're going to be doing an experimental section. And what that means is you got to get ready to do 5 full-length, 35-minute timed sections with only a short 10 to 15-minute break somewhere in the middle. After you start engaging in these timed exams, the last part is review, which is figuring out why you got things wrong, why you had difficulty with things. Maybe it was a time constraint, maybe it was just the fundamental concepts that the questions were testing. Doesn't really matter, but you've got to figure out what it is so you can avoid making those same mistakes again. One thing I too often see from students is that they want to take exam after exam, measure the results, be happy or sad about those results, and then move on from there. And that's understandable. That's what I did back when I was studying. It actually took me an entire year to go from a 152 to a 175. And the biggest breakthrough I had was when I was able to figure out why I was making the same mistakes again and again. Because even just a set of 10 exams could be enough to review. If you review those in depth, that could be enough material to show you pretty much everything the exam could potentially test you on. But people want to do all 86 numbered exams and the other 7 that are unnumbered, so that brings you to nearly 100. But does that mean that 5 years from now you should do another 15 exams also and increase to 105 perhaps? Like, no, that's not the point. The point is take the most recent 10, 20, 30 exams, work within those specifically. Maybe you want to do exams 62 to 71, untimed, by type, in your accuracy phase. Then use 72 to 81 as timed sections. Use 82 to 87 for your full-length timed exams, and maybe mix in some earlier ones as well. But it's really important that you don't neglect the review process. I would rather you do 1 exam a week and review it in excruciating detail than do 2 exams a week and barely do any review at all. Have any of you been doing review as part of your prep process? What does your review process look like?
I try to do the blind review. That was also gone over previously. But I am kind of struggling. That's why I wanted to also ask you what your best approach is to review. Is it to like listen to explanations of questions online, or is it kind of trying to figure out what you specifically did wrong? So I don't know.
That's a great question. Yeah, and ultimately you want to mix. Explanations can be useful. Blind review can also be useful. There are a couple of things I would add on to that though. First off is, if you're just learning, if you're in one of the earlier phases, then sure, look at explanations to kind of hold your hand and guide you as to how you might go about doing the questions, because someone else's diagramming style is probably better than whatever you've cooked up on your own, because people have been through the process before and kind of refined diagramming techniques. So I would recommend looking at explanations first. But once you're later into your study process, you've got to own the material. And that means that you can figure out some way to do it on your own, in your own language, in your own style. And then later, you can check it against explanations online, whether they're video or written, doesn't matter. One thing I would suggest is, for the problems that give you the most difficulty, actually articulate in your own words your thought process. So that means, just like I want you to do in this class. So for example, anything you got wrong, anything you had difficulty with, where was your mistake? Was it in, let's say, logical reasoning? Was it in the stimulus? Was it in the question stem? Or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the stimulus, obviously you've got to engage with what was their method of reasoning, perhaps. If it was just IDing the question stem, maybe you have to drill and refine your identification of different question types. Or if it was in the answer choices, what was tempting about the wrong answer that made you pick it, and what ultimately makes it wrong? And what is discouraging about the right answer that pushes you away from it, and what ultimately makes it correct? You want to do this again and again and again. Not necessarily for all 20 questions you might have had difficulty with or gotten wrong in an exam, but maybe the toughest 5. You actually want to write it out or talk it out with a friend or a study buddy or a tutor or instructor or somebody. But you've got to put it out into the world and outside of your own head. Get it out of your head, because it's too easy. If you're just kind of thinking it over, you could say, oh yeah, I see why it was A. How could I have been so dumb? And then you just move on from there. But if your review of a question is taking 30 seconds or 3 minutes, that's not really enough. You want it to take maybe at least 5-10 minutes, if not more. Then the question is, how could you do that for 2 exams a week? And I'd say you probably can't, which means reduce to 1 exam a week so that you can review it in more depth. The other thing I would say is, as part of your blind review process, one thing you might want to do is rate your confidence level on each attempt. Meaning that first attempt, rank your confidence in what you're choosing on a scale of 1 to 10, but you're not allowed to choose 7 because 7 is the cop-out answer. 7 is like, I kind of feel pretty good about it. Make a decision, either 6 and below, where like you're not really that sure, or 8 and above, which means you're fairly confident. And see, were you overly confident the first time but not the second, or vice versa, and see where the mismatch is. You can see if it's a time constraint issue, or if it's a fundamentals issue, or you were just down to 2 and you got lucky one time and not lucky the other time. Are you all using recent exams and real exams? I guess Tina's informed you all about using real actual LSAT prep tests, right? Super important. There's the free Juno 7 exam. There are 3 on LSAC's website for the digital LSAT at familiar.lsac.org. They have put on there very recently exams 71, 73, and 74. Totally free. It's meant to walk you through what the digital LSAT looks like, but you can also use it as free practice material. One thing I do want to comment on with the digital LSAT familiarization tool is that they have integrated the ability to reveal the correct answer next to every single question. And I want you to avoid looking at the answer as you're working through the problems, because that instant feedback, that instant gratification, it's really tempting to want to know immediately whether you got it right or wrong, but that totally screws up your review process later. And it also kind of puts you in this mindset where you're always getting instant feedback when on test day, doing full-length exams or even individual time sections, you're not going to get that feedback. You have to work all the way to the end before seeing your results. And so you don't want to be impacted by knowing what the answer is. And of course, seeing the answer and thinking it over will screw up your timing as well. So don't look until the end of a section if you're doing time sections. Don't look until the end of an exam if you're doing full-length timed exams. And that's a lot, of course, because you're doing 5 full-length timed sections back-to-back with only a 10-15 minute break in the middle. So if you have, let's say, 5 times 35 plus 10 to 15 minutes, I don't know who's good at math here, but that's probably something like over 3 hours, right? It's a little over 3 hours before you get any feedback on how your LSAT went. So if you're studying on your own in the library or with a friend, and you're checking after every section or after every question, that's not replicating the entire 3-hour wait that you have before getting into the specifics of what you got wrong and why. So really important, just take a step back, slow down, just work through the problems, and check later. Has anyone looked at that familiarization tool on LSAC's site? What do you think of it?
It's different. I think it just takes like getting used to, just because it only shows like one question at a time.
Right. That's one of the hugest things about it, I think, honestly, is that you can only see one question at a time. And so the site, again, is familiar.lsac.org. And since nobody here is taking June, that means that all of you are taking July, September, and beyond, where you are going to have the digital LSAT as a possibility in July, or definitely in the fall. So that means you've got to get used to this. It is a different experience from the paper and pencil LSAT. The biggest difference, honestly, I think, is only being able to see one question at a time, because you're used to being able to see entire games, entire passages across a 2-page spread. So it makes it a little bit easier to go out of order when you're doing questions, something to get used to. You also have to get used to scrolling up and down to read an entire reading comprehension passage. So play around with it. Do you have to get a tablet? No, but it could help to do at least 1 or 2 full-length timed exams on a tablet just to get used to the experience. Now, the tablet, they're using a Microsoft Surface Go. It's a 10-inch screen. You don't have to use that specifically. Any tablet would be fine. If you have a Samsung, you could use that. You could get an Amazon Fire for around $150, And if you don't like it after the LSAT, you can always return it. Amazon has a pretty good return policy, I hear. So keep that in mind. It is worth the investment, I think, if it makes you feel at all comfortable, more so than you would otherwise be. Definitely play around with it. It's not that mobile friendly, honestly, so just using it on a smartphone isn't really going to replicate the experience properly. Desktop is somewhat similar, but then you're losing the touchscreen capability. So I do recommend practicing or at least walking through it on a tablet a couple of times. I could talk a little bit about features of the digital LSAT because they do have some interesting tools on there. You can highlight in 3 different colors, orange, pink, and yellow, which starts to look like a logic game a little bit, but that's a tool that you have available to you. You can underline. Those are the 2 biggest things I think are going to be useful for most people. Other things you can do, you can increase the line spacing. So kind of instead of having only 1 line break between each line, you could have 1.5 or 2, whatever you like to spread it out more. The downside is that then you will have to scroll up and down a bit more. So keep that in mind. You can increase or decrease the text size, which is meant to be an accessibility option, but could be nice to have if you want it. What else? You can increase or decrease the screen brightness. You can invert the colors, so make it black and white or grayscale as options if you want. What else can you do? You can flag questions. I think one of the nicest things is that you can flag questions to come back to later. So for example, in logical reasoning, I like to mark off the 3 to 5 hardest questions and just not deal with them in the moment. If it's a parallel reasoning question, if it's super technical like science or philosophy, I might just say, you know what? I don't want to deal with this in the moment. I'd rather come back to it later. So I would usually just do a big asterisk next to those questions, skip them, come back at the end, and deal with easier things that might come later. But now you can actually flag them, and there's a little navigation bar at the bottom showing all the questions in the section. And a little flag will pop up if you flag number 2, for example, which is nice to have, because then you can see at a glance what you flagged, what you've completed, what you haven't, and you'll be able to come back to those later. You can click immediately to go back wherever you want. Another nice thing is bubbling. Bubbling on a Scantron paper and pencil LSAT might take you maybe a minute to 2 minutes just to physically bubble all 25 questions. And by the way, I recommend bubbling in, out as a circle if you're doing paper and pencil. But the nice thing is that on digital, no more of that. You tap, you click, whatever, and you're good. So you're saving a 1.5 to 2 minutes right there. Also, there's a countdown clock counting down from 35 minutes down to 0. And so there's no ambiguity or confusion about timing on the part of the proctors. Proctors are human. They're not perfect. They're hired every now and then. They don't always know the rules to give you the 5-minute warning, for example. All that potential for mistakes is removed entirely. Now the clock starts, it goes down, and you can see exactly where you're at any moment. Question?
At the 5-minute mark, does it give any indication?
Yes. Yeah, they do. Yes. So they give you a 5-minute warning on the digital LSAT, and it pops up on the screen like one of those annoying pop-up ads, and you have to click it and make it go away before you can move on. So they want you to know and remove all the ambiguity around the timing. But once the 5-minute warning hits, you can no longer remove that clock. So like for the 35 minutes down to 5, you can make the clock go away if that motion is distracting or stresses you out. But once the 5-minute warning hits, you can no longer remove that. So that is something to practice if you tend to get stressed out by things like that. I think it's useful to get used to the format in every regard. They've released, like I said, 3 exams so far. It's 71, 73, and 74, which are from around 2013 and 2014, so they are quite recent. They will be releasing a handful more in the lead up to the fall, so you can expect probably at least another 3 or 4 by September, I would imagine. And it's not a scoring tool. Like, you can do the questions, but they're not going to give you a score as a raw score conversion or out of 180 on the Familiarization website. It's just meant to be a tool to get you used to the LSAT, but as a bonus, it's giving you some free questions to practice on. Any questions so far?
So it won't tell you if you're right or wrong?
No, it won't tell you if you're right or wrong. The Familiarization tool won't tell you, but you can reveal the answer like I said. And of course, on the digital LSAT, you're not getting your score back immediately. You do still have to wait 3 weeks on average. Now, I remember somebody mentioned they were taking July. July, the delay will actually be longer. They just announced you won't get your score back until August 28th. And that's because they're kind of measuring the results of the digital versus the paper, because July is unique in that half of students get paper, half get digital.
Is that at random?
Yes. So it's at random, and they are not giving you any advance notice. So you got to be kind of ready for anything at all with July. But the nice thing about July is that you can see your score before deciding whether to cancel. It's a one-time freebie, like a SAT score choice that they're giving students for July specifically, just to kind of help you deal with the ambiguity of not knowing whether you're getting the paper format or the digital. But then September, you're getting 100% digital. This 50-50 split is considered a best practice when transitioning from one test format to another. But regardless of how it turns out, they're still going to digital in the fall anyway. So I don't really entirely see the point of it, but they're kind of just doing what they feel like they should. Now, another thing about July, like I said, see your score before canceling. The other thing is that on July, if you cancel, you get a free retake. So you get 2 LSATs for the price of 1 if you cancel July. But that free retake won't apply to September because July scores come back August 28th, which is after the September registration deadline. So if you want that free retake, you can use it for October, November, January, March, or April into 2020. So I think July registrations will actually be higher for that reason, because people like the idea of seeing their score before canceling. People like the idea of a free retake. I think if you're on a super tight budget, maybe the free retake is a nice thing, but $200 compared to the cost of law school is a drop in the bucket. And I don't really think it's great to have a cancellation on your record if you can avoid it, because you never know what will happen in the future. You cancel July. What if something goes wrong in September? You cancel that too. Then you have 2 cancellations on your record, and a pattern starts to look not so great for law schools. So I wouldn't recommend taking July with the intention of canceling. And I wouldn't recommend taking it either just to see what the digital LSAT is like, because you can do the test 71, 73, and 74 on LSAC's site to see what it's like if you can get a tablet or borrow someone else's tablet to get that similar experience. Plus, the big prep companies like Kaplan and Princeton Review, they do typically offer free proctored exams, mostly for marketing purposes, but you can use them for the proctoring. And I imagine that with the LSAT going digital, they will give those proctored exams on a tablet. So I'd recommend calling them up and seeing what they have to say about that. But yeah, I guess one thing I should mention about the digital format is that you can't draw freehand on the tablet the way that you might expect. You can only use those highlighting and underlining tools, the flagging tools, but that's pretty much it. You can't draw like this. They have scrap paper that they'll give you. They'll give you a booklet of about 14, 16 pages of scrap. That's where you're going to do all your work on the digital LSAT. It will be on scrap paper on the side. So if you're making notations for reading comp or diagrams for logic games, you'll do all that on the side, but not on the tablet screen. So if you're studying, I recommend not doing your writing in the books, because you won't be able to write next to the questions on the digital. I recommend treating your books like they are a screen with PDFs and doing your work separately. So if you have PDFs, that's amazing, because then you can just look at the screen, have your scrap on the side, and it'll pretty closely mimic what the digital LSAT experience will be like. But get used to not crossing off or underlining with your pencil or pen on the books. You have to use LSAC's tools, which require more clicking. They give you a stylus with the stylus on one end and a pen on the other end, so you can kind of flip it over if you want. And I think they're also allowing pencils now as well. So you do have options for that, but that's all applying really to the scrap paper that you'll have on the side. What else? Let's see. So the timing, like I said, the LSAT is always 3 sessions back to back with no break, then a short break, then 2 more back to back. But with the paper format, usually you would have maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds in between, as the proctors say, put down your pencils, close your booklets. Okay, open the booklets, pick up your pencils and continue. You no longer have that. It is immediate. It is immediate on the tablet, no break at all. And when you first open the digital LSAT, the directions will pop up. And when they pop up, the clock has already started. It's not like you click the directions and then you move forward. So people are kind of under the misconception that once you click to see question 1, that's when the clock starts. No, the clock starts immediately when they say go and the directions pop up. Obviously, don't read the directions because you already know them. They're always the same. Just go on to question number 1. One other thing I should mention, I guess, is for reading comprehension specifically, we're used to usually reading pretty low quality stuff on the computer like BuzzFeed, Facebook, listicles, stuff like that. The LSAT has obviously dense academic text, so I recommend getting used to reading dense academic text on a computer screen and getting used to kind of slowing down, reading more thoroughly. Of course, people always recommend The Economist and Scientific American. Those are excellent resources to read more academic subjects that are of the style of the LSAT. But I think you also want to get used to pacing yourself to a certain speed that you want for the LSAT. So I have a couple of tools I recommend for that.
I'm sorry, what were the publications that you said?
Scientific American and The Economist. So there are 2 websites that let you input text on a screen and display it at different speeds. One is phrasereader.com. The other is Spreeder.com. And so the idea is basically a sort of speed reading. But I don't mean speed reading like you want to gloss over and just get the main idea or something. This actually displays the text for you at particular speeds. So you can copy paste text from The Economist or Scientific American into one of these sites and display it at 200 words per minute, 250 words per minute, 300 words per minute, whatever you like. And so you might say, if there's 500 words in a reading comp passage and you want to read it in about 2 to 3 minutes, you've got to be at a particular speed. If you're going at 100 words per minute, you're not going to get there in time. So play around with it and get used to gradually increasing your speed that you're comfortable with. I've seen people go from 200 words per minute to 400 words per minute in only a month or 2. It's possible. So if you want to get there by September or even July, you can, but I would recommend starting now because the LSAT obviously is very dense text, much more so than you get typically when you're online. Another thing for reading comprehension on the digital format is that there's no line references. There's no line numberings. So also get used to that difference there. You can underline and notate on the screen with their tools, but that's pretty much it. So you kind of get used to going back and forth between the question and the text, scrolling up and down. It is something to get used to. I don't want to overemphasize how big a deal it is because the content is not changing at all, just the format, but there is a certain level of adaptation that you want as you're getting beyond the fundamentals into what test day will actually be like. Let's see, other policy changes recently. In recent years, they've removed the limitation on the number of times you can take the LSAT. It used to be 3 times in a 2-year period. That limit is removed. You can now take it as many times as you want, which I suspect means that admission officers will get used to seeing people having taken it more times. Maybe 4 or even 5 times could be okay. But of course, I recommend not taking it until you're ready. But you do have many opportunities. It's gone from being offered 4 times a year to now 9 or 10 times a year. So you now have this coming up again, July, September, October, November, January, March, April, then June and July of 2020, and so on. So there are many chances, meaning that there is less downside to retaking than there used to be. Law schools do not average multiple scores. They only take the highest, and the gap between test dates is smaller than it used to be. So for those of you taking it in September, you could take it 4 weeks later in October and 4 weeks later again in November. What was that?
That was a balloon.
Why was there a balloon in here? That's okay. Happy birthday. So you have September, October, November, 4-week gaps in between those. And so you only have to stay fresh on the LSAT for another 4 weeks versus it used to be a 2 to 3 month gap. So 4 weeks, not that much effort, additional effort. Maybe all you have to do is take a timed exam a week for 4 more weeks, and you could do better just by luck alone. There is a score band or margin of error of 3.5 points on each end, meaning that let's say if your true aptitude is a 165, you might get a 169 one day, a 161 the other day, and the LSAT is still a valid exam. But this means that if you just take it 2-3 times, by luck, you could do 2 to 3 or even 4 points better. And you look at the ROI on that, you register for the LSAT, yes, it's $200, but 3 or 4 points higher means more scholarship money, getting to a better law school. It's really a no-brainer to retake it if you think even by luck alone, you could do maybe just a point or two more. That 1 or 2 points could make the difference between a yes or a no, or between getting no scholarship money or getting $10,000 or $20,000 a year, which really does add up. I think this is the easiest money you can make. It's just getting a point or two more on your LSAT score, which is why retaking makes sense. Okay, so I gave you all about 10, 11 minutes for that one. By the way, I don't ever recommend necessarily timing individual games to the 8-minute, 45-second time constraint, but I do want to, of course, have enough time to cover this game and some other stuff too, so we have to have some limits here. It's a pretty hard one. I mean, logic games are not in a perfect order of difficulty, but there is a general order of difficulty. So the fourth game probably won't be the easiest. The first one probably won't be the hardest. Is it ordering or grouping? Let's just start there. Grouping, perfect. The centers are not really in order. There's no before-after component to it. So we're grouping them. Yeah, exactly. We're taking the 5 materials, putting them into the centers. So you could do it this way. Whether you do it horizontal or vertical, I don't think it really matters, honestly. It's really up to you. We have a minimum of 2, and we have the 5 materials. So I list the 5 materials. I make a diagram where we will place the materials into the diagram. We have at least 2, but no more than 3. So we can make a hard line here where maybe we will have 1 more above. We have the rules indented. Any center with wood also has newsprint. So we could say if wood, then wood and newsprint are together. We have anything at 2 is also at 1. So I'll just draw a little arrow. Anything from the second center will go on to the first as well. We have only 1 center with plastic, and plastic and glass can never go together. So those are all just the fundamental rules laid out. No real inferences yet. Did anyone make any inferences for this game? Any connections between the rules? Well, we've got only 1 plastic, right? And we know that anything at 2 is also going to be at 1. So anything at 2 repeats onto 1. So, thoughts? Perfect, yeah, you all got it. So there's no plastics at 2. Plastic could be on 1, could be on 3. We don't know, but it's definitely not going to be on 2. And of course, glass and plastic cannot go together, so those interact as well. But that's pretty much all I would do up front for this game. Not a ton in the way of inferences, which means we will probably be drawing more over the course of the game. First question, number 18, is a typical orientation question where you just want to take 1 rule at a time and apply it to all 5 choices, checking for violations. It's much more efficient to do it this way than to take 1 choice at a time and apply all the rules to that choice. Because then you're cycling through all the rules again and again and again. So let's just take 1 rule at a time and go through all 5. So let's take, for example, just the first rule. If you have W, then you have Wn in the same category, in the same center. What can we eliminate based on that? So let's look for cases where we have wood, but no newsprint. Perfect. A has center 3 with wood, no newsprint, so A is out. Any others? No, no others. Typically, you'll be able to eliminate 1 choice with each rule. They won't give you that many eliminations based on 1 rule alone. They want to force you to cycle through all the rules, which I think is okay because it's a good warm-up that way. Next, anything at 2 is also at 1. What can we eliminate based on that? Perfect. C has G and T on 2, but G and W on 1. So C is out. Anything else? No, once again, nothing else. How about the next rule? Only one plastic. E, perfect. E has 2 plastics, so that's out. And we have one rule remaining, one wrong answer remaining. P and G can't be together. What can we eliminate? D, perfect. So by elimination, B is our answer. And that's how you want to work through an orientation question, just one rule at a time by elimination. So that's 18. Number 19. Somebody already said this actually. We can't have plastic on 2, right? So plastic is left to be on 1 or 3. And it really is as simple as that. You could just pick D and move on. If you wanted to and you weren't totally confident, you could skip number 19 and come back to it later, because by then you would have drawn more valid scenarios that could give you cases where you've proven that plastic could be on 1 or 3. And by the way, we also have our correct answer for number 18 to help us out here. 18B has plastic on 3, and we know that works. So any choice for number 19 that does not list center 3 is automatically out. So you would be able to eliminate off the bat A and C, even if you didn't know anything else at all. But then, of course, we know just by intuition that plastic on 2 works, plastic on 1 and 3 works, and we can always come back to it at the end if we want to confirm that. Number 20, if center 2 has 3 kinds of material, what must center 3 have? So we're saying that for this one specifically, we're going to have all 3 on center 2. What's going to happen as a result?
Plastic has to be in 3 because if it's in 2, it would be in 1.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, you got it. Exactly right. So plastic will have to go on 3. The reason is that if center 2 has 3 types, center 1 will also have 3 types. And as a result, they're going to be identical. Centers 2 and 1 will have to be the same because you have 3 on both. So you're going to end up having G on 2, G on 1, plastic on 3, and that's all we need to know. That gives us number 20. You don't have to draw out the entire scenario fully. There's way too much ambiguity to bother doing that anyway. We only have to go as far as we need to solve the question, and they tell us plastic on 3 works. So excellent job. That was C is our answer for number 20. Number 21 now, if each center has 3 kinds of material. So now they're saying that not only do 1 and 2 have all 3, but now all 3 of them have all 3. So all 3 centers have 3 materials each. So what can we infer from this? Just like previously, we're going to once again have glass on 2 and 1 and plastic on 3. There's no other way to do it, because if you put plastic on 1 or 2, it'll be on both 1 and 2, because if you have 3 materials on 2, those same 3 will be on 1, so 1 and 2 will be identical. What that means is you have GGP on 1, 2, and 3 right off the bat. Now remaining, we have T, W, and N left to play around with. But we know that W requires W and N to be together, so you're never going to have T and W in any of these 2 remaining slots. You're always going to have N and then one of T and W left to place. T and W can't be the only 2 because, again, W requires W and together. So you'll have N, then T or W on 1, T or W on 2, T or W on 3. But that's really enough. We don't have to flesh out specifically what happens on that top level there. We can simply run through the choices once again. So, looking at this one, anyone have thoughts? Well, we're figuring that out right now. So we have G on 1, G on 2, P on 3, and on all 3 of them. Work by elimination. Could center 2 have glass? As the only one? No, correct. Perfect. Center 2 is not the only one with glass because glass is on both 1 and 2. Only center 3 with newsprint. No, newsprint is on all three once again. Only center one with plastic. That's not even happening at all, period. Only center three with tin. Could that happen? Yeah. That would be fine. So D is our answer for this one. And then just to be thorough, we could look at E. Only one with wood. Why not? Because whatever's on 2 is also on 1. So if you could have TTW or WWT, but you're not going to have WT or TW. Because 2 and 1 are always going to be the same if they both have 3. So it's D for number 21. Then on to 22.
Could you quickly explain how come all of them have N? Is that just an assumption?
No, it's an inference that I made because we know that. I'll take a step back for a second. So all three centers have 3 different materials each, is the constraint of this question. So we know that it's going to be GGP because you only have 1 plastic and 2 and 1 repeat. We also know that anything on 2 is going to be on 1. So if all 3 of them have 3, that means that 2 and 1 are going to be identical. Now, we have T, W, and N left to place, but W requires W and N. So you could never have W and T. That just would not work. So as a result, how do you avoid that? You either have W and N or T and N. But either way, you're going to have N there no matter what. So I just said, let's say we're going to have N on all 3 of these, and then we'll put essentially T/W in the remaining. All right, so that was 21. Now we are on to 22, which is going to be a little bit different. If center 3 has glass, so if center 3 has glass, what can we infer? Where's plastic going? Perfect. Now as for this, what are we going to have here on 2? We're not going to have plastic. We're not going to have glass because glass on 2 would mean glass is also on 1, and P and G conflict. So once again, we're left to these 3, T, W, and N. But we know we're not going to have T and W together as the only 2, which means we're going to have N automatically. And then we will have T, W, or both. But N is a given. We could say we'll have W or T there, and maybe another one as well. We don't know, but again, they repeat. So what that means is that you would actually have N here, N there, TW there, TW there. So actually, this is the limit. But we don't really need to go any further. We have our answer. We don't need to draw more than is necessary. We learned N will be on 2 no matter what. That is a must, giving us B. Any questions on that one? Yeah? Yeah, sure. Plastic is never on 2, period. That's a general inference for the entire game because anything that's on 2 must also be on 1, and our initial rule says there's only 1 plastic. So if you put plastic on 2, you'd have to have it on 1, and that's having 2 plastics already, violating that rule. So that's 22. Then finally, 23, the last one. If center 1 is the only center with wood, so wood is on 1, it's not going to be on 2, it's not going to be on 3. What happens as a result? Well, W requires WN, right? So we're going to have N there. We can't have plastic on 2 as a given. And we also know that 2 repeats onto 1. So we automatically face this limit where anything here going to be there. We can't have 3 things on 2, of course, because then we'd have 4 things on 1, since W is only going to be on 1 specifically. So we could say as a result here that who's our most easygoing variable that we've seen popping up again and again and again? It's n, right? N's going to have to go on 2 as a given, because we're going to have the things here repeating over there, and W's out of the running and P's out of the running. We have left N, T, and G left to place. But G has to go somewhere, and it's going to have to go on 2 and on 1 as well. The reason it's going to have to go on those places is that if it didn't, we'd have nowhere else left to put it. We're not going to have P there. We're not going to have P on 1. We're going to have P on 3. So this repeats over there. Since W is only here, we're not going to have it on 2 as well, which means that these 2 guys have to go there as well. Any questions on this one? You all good? All right, so this is everything that we infer as a result of this. The only variable that we have not yet placed is T. So T has to go somewhere. Where is it going to go? 3, perfect. And that's it. So they ask us, what could be a complete and accurate list of what's happening within one center? Well, it's pretty limited, right? It's one of these, or this. And so we get a hit right away with choice A, P and T on 3. So that's the game. It's not the easiest game for sure, but it is doable. You just take these limited rules plus the arrow and just apply them again and again and again. And the game becomes a lot easier if you could take those rules and kind of absorb them into your short-term working memory. And the way you do that is by practicing. So you could lay out the rules for yourself, then cover them up or fold it over the paper and see, can you replicate all the rules of the game? Like without looking, could you rewrite every single rule of the game? Only one P, P and G together, P and G never together, 2 repeats onto 1, and so on. Just repeat, and you'll see that a lot of the games, a lot of the harder ones even, they have few rules, but the rules they do have are complex and a bit more theoretical and abstract, harder to diagram, but you've just got to force yourself to absorb it and just apply again and again and again. If you have to keep looking back at what's written on the paper from LSAC, it'll take you way too long. And you also want to get good at drawing lots of hypotheticals and drawing them quickly also. Like we drew probably 4 or 5 diagrams just for this game. Some games will have less, some will have more, but you want to be able to do it when you need to. Sometimes the only way you can learn inferences is by drawing new diagrams, taking it out of your head, taking it beyond just the question stem, and turning it from being abstract into being concrete to see the inferences that logically follow from the constraint of the question. Any questions on this game overall? So this game you might see, it's from Judo 7, one of the free LSATs. And this was back when they had only a 1-page layout for logic games. Starting in test 66, they switched to have a 2-page layout for logic games, giving you slightly more space, more scratch paper, which was really nice to have. But now with the digital format, you're going to have essentially unlimited scrap paper, that booklet where they'll give you more, 14 pages, 16 pages, more than enough. So I used to tell people, only write on the page, get used to the constraint. That's now out the window for those of you who will be taking digital. Instead, you pretty much have all the scrap that you need. So take advantage of it. Feel comfortable drawing new diagrams. Don't try to do everything in your head. I see students try to do it. The LSAT games are meant to push you beyond those limits and force you to write things down. So don't try to be a hero and do it all in your head. Put it on the page, draw things out. Be okay with making mistakes and learning. That's part of the process of getting to absorb what's going on with the game, is taking the rules, making them intuitive, and then seeing all the inferences that can result from them. But drawing it out is really the best way to learn it. I draw everything out. I don't do it in my head. It would just be way too hard. And there's no bonus points for doing it in your head. No one's going to know whether you did or not. They just want to see the correct answer on the Scantron or on the tablet. Any questions on anything I've covered so far? Yeah?
So if one practices this technique, would they finish the logic game? Would they be able to have time left over? Or would it increase their speed and effectiveness in answering the questions? Or would it just basically fit within the time frame that's allotted?
That's a great question. So Not all games are of equal difficulty. Like I said, 845 is only an average. Some games should get down to 6-7 minutes. I know it sounds crazy, but it is possible. There are some game types that have just repeated again and again over the years. And if you can refine your understanding of those concepts, it can become very smooth. Then you have a time bank built up to apply to the tougher games that might appear elsewhere in the section. Like, anyone seen Legally Blonde here? Yes, you know that they have a scene where they have her working through a logic game with CDs that are new and used. That game is Test 31 Game 2, and it's one of the most difficult games ever. But there are actually many other games like it that have been administered over the years. They chose that one for the movie because it sounds so ridiculous and complex, but you can make it manageable by doing lots of games of those types, developing your understanding of the concepts, because they do repeat themselves. There's been at least 6 or 7 games like that, and I can actually list them for you if you like. So the CDs game is Test 31 Game 2, but there have been many others just like it. Test 33 Game 2, which is the Birds in the Forest game. There's Test 36 Game 1, the Fruit Stand game. There's Test 45 Game 3, and there's Test 58 Game 2 with volunteers. Now, I also wrote my own logic game of that type on my website as well. But basically, you see they're just repeating the same concepts over and over throughout these games. If you do all of these, then this one won't be so bad in the end. Even if it is a little bit harder, of course. They repeat themselves over time. There are patterns to this test. If you've only done 5 or 10 exams, you may not see the patterns, especially because you're just studying this for a month or 4 months or whatever it is. But someone like me, I've been doing this for 15 years now. For me, I've done these games enough. I've done them all like at least 20 times or more, so I can see the patterns and show them to you. That's really what my goal is to make them relatable. But you see, they span for over a 27 exam period, and there are even newer ones that are similar as well, but I don't want to spoil anything for you. But they repeat over time. There are patterns. On my website, the LSAT blog, I kind of break down things by category, by game type. I even have an article where I talk about 7 logic games that repeated over time. And this is just one category. There are 6 other categories where there are 2 games or more that are incredibly similar to each other. So if you do the older one, the newer one becomes easier and more manageable. I suppose I should talk a little bit about what else my website and free resources contain. So I'll do a little bit of a walkthrough for that now. So like I said, I have the different sections: games, reasoning, reading comp, plus test day prep covered. The most popular resource are my schedules. These are self-study schedules. I have free week-by-week ones. I also have premium day-by-day ones breaking down for you exactly what to do every single day over the entire course of your prep. I also have guides, cheat sheets, checklists, explanations, and full video courses for every section. They're not $1,000. They're basically month-to-month pay-as-you-go. They also let you attend my live online classes as well as part of the package. So it's not just watching a video with no interaction with the instructor. I actually hold at least 2 to 4 online classes per month where you can actually ask your questions. I hold them at night. I hold them in the afternoon so that they're accessible for anyone depending on your schedule. I have 2 free classes coming up. This is my free class in person at my office in downtown Brooklyn. I hold it once a month. The next one is later in June, I think the 26th. It's a Wednesday night. You can attend free in person. I cover logical reasoning. I cover games. I answer any questions you have. That's a free in-person class. Then the one today at 5 p.m. is a different link. That's digital LSAT 531. And so it is case sensitive, capital D, lowercase digital, capital LSAT 531. And that's today at 5 p.m. If you want even more LSAT and more of me, I understand if you don't want to bother, it is a Friday afternoon. But the in-person is going to be on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in downtown Brooklyn, near Atlantic Terminal Barclays in Fort Greene, near City Point. If you're familiar with that, there's a Target and Trader Joe's nearby if you want to grab a snack beforehand or afterwards, but I do give pizza. So those are 2 free classes I have. There's the courses, there's the schedules. a lot more. There's also the YouTube channel and the podcast I highly recommend, because reading stuff is boring and you're already doing enough of that with the LSAT in college. So watch the videos, listen to the podcast. The podcast is on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. Just search LSAT Unplugged. My website, just Google my name, Steve Schwartz, and LSAT blog. You'll find it pretty easily. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. Any questions on anything? I've covered it all. All right, well, if nothing else, I want to thank you all for coming. I'll let you go a little bit early for today, but it's been a pleasure having you all in the class, and so thank you again for coming.